We'd like to call a session Monday, May 6, 2019 of the Albany Common Council meeting. We're sorry that we're not on time at 7, but we had a lot of things to discuss in caucus before our meeting, so we apologize for the time frame of starting at 7:30 and not starting at 7. So, Kashana, can you please call the roll?
Mr. Anani,
Present.
Ms. Sapliers, Mr. Ballerin, Mr. Conti, Ms. Delchette,
Here.
Ms. Fahey, Ms. Farrell, Mr. Flynn, Mr. Hoey,
Here.
Mr. Igo, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Kimbrough, Ms. Love, Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Robinson, 12 present, 3 absent.
Thank you. And will you please rise with me and say the Pledge of Allegiance? And after the Pledge of Allegiance, we'll have a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now we move into our section, our public comment section period. Each speaker has 5 minutes to talk about any subject or address any subject they would like to address to the council. Council members will not be able to answer your questions, so please do not ask them. And this time it's only for the public to comment. If council members feel the need or wish to do so in response to any public comment period, they will do so in the appropriate section of the agenda, which is normally miscellaneous, when council members will respond. So you have 5 minutes. I will give you a 4-minute warning. I'll tell you have a minute left. And with that being said, can the clerk please call the first speaker?
Mr. Gene Solan.
And can you state your name and your address, and all public comment period, all public comment is to be addressed to the chairman, who is myself, and not council members. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Common Council. My name is Gene Solan. I live at 16 Prospect Terrace in the city of Albany. I've been a resident of the city for over 40 years, members of several neighborhood associations, currently a member of the Council of Albany Neighborhood Associations, a citywide federation of neighborhood associations. I was previously I was on the City of Albany 2030 Comprehensive Planning Board that produced that roadmap for the development of the City of Albany. My concerns that I'd like to address and share with you tonight are twofold. Number one, 563 New Scotland Avenue, and number two, Rezone Albany, the USDO as it's commonly called, which stands for Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance. 563 is located behind the New Scotland Avenue Post Office and opposite the St. Peter's Hospital. The development plan for this site calls for 188 apartments in 5 buildings. The plan proposes a 5-story tower building on the site, as well as proposing a storefront, commercial and retail space on the first floor. The plan proposes to relocate the existing post office, fortunately on-site, not off-site, near in the commercial space strip. An area variance is requested by the developer from the City of Albany Board of Zoning Appeals. The area variance is to allow a 5-story building, including residential apartments and commercial retail space on New Scotland Avenue. The 563 New Scotland Avenue Development Plan, requesting this area variance is really unacceptable. Neighbors are opposed to it. There's very strong pushback from the community on this particular development site because of the huge impact that it will have on the neighborhoods along New Scotland Avenue. This particular development project is definitely going to negatively impact the character and quality of the surrounding blocks and neighborhood. The 5-story tower building is 2 stories above the currently permitted building height in the current Unified Development Ordinance. And this is an issue of great concern. One could say the 5-story tower is just too tall. The number of buildings on the site, one might say, are too many. But there's a particular disadvantage and harm that's going to be caused by that 5-story tower, residential and commercial uses. The size and the density of the 563 New Scotland Avenue project is, as I said before, is going to have not only a negative effect on the neighborhoods in the New Scotland area, but also on other midtown and uptown
You have
neighborhoods.
1 minute remaining, sir.
1 minute?
1 minute, yep.
So that's something that is very undesirable. You have an opportunity as council members to weigh in on the Unified Sustainable Development, the review that is currently underway. And it's really important that you pay close attention to the recommendations that come out of that review process. Rezone Albany was enacted in April of 2017. It's 2 years later. There's a track record with regard to Rezone Albany, and it's very important that what comes out of the newly revised ordinance, that it promotes, protects, preserves, and strengthens Albany's irreplaceable neighborhoods. Thank you for the opportunity to address this issue.
Thank you, sir. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Peter Sheehan.
Excuse me. Good evening, members of the Common Council. My name is Pete Sheehan, and I live at 32 Buckingham Drive. And I'm talking about the proposed development at 563 New Scotland Avenue as well. And we have lived at 32 Buckingham Drive for approximately 18 years, and I'm also a member of the executive committee of a national environmental organization called the Sierra Club. I'm on the local Hudson Mohawk group of the Sierra Club. And so I just want to take a look at this from a kind of an environmental impact aspect of this project. And what we would like to see is that this development there will have to be a declaration under SECRA, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, and we would like to see this classified as a type 1 action. And that will, as a type 1 action, and a full environmental impact statement that would, we hope, accompany that. We'll get the most review, the most input, a good scoping document of all the issues that are involved, like the gentleman who just spoke about. And we feel this being declared a type 1 action is most appropriate. And let me just continuing on the there's kind of two phases of this thing. The zoning board is going to make a declaration about the zoning changes that are necessary. And there's a particular section in SECR that addresses that, and it says the granting of a zoning change at the request of an applicant for an action that meets or exceeds one or more of the thresholds given elsewhere in this list means that this is a type 1 action for the zoning change. Now, for the actual project itself, SECR is very prescriptive, and under a particular section of SECR, it says activities other than the construction of, no, that's not important. It says activities that meet or exceed any of the following thresholds or the expansion of existing non-residential facilities by more than 50%, et cetera, et cetera. And then they get to, in a city, town, or village having a population of 150,000 persons or less, a facility with more than 100,000 square feet in gross area. Just bear with me. Okay, so, I'm sorry. All right, which this does. You then, because of this, the action is to be, like I said, we'd like to have this considered a type 1 action. And the threshold for such an action comes under the appropriate section in SECR that really affects this is the cumulative impacts that this development, along with the other developments that are in play right now, are what really require that the cumulative impacts of this project be considered. Okay, and a cumulative impact, just real quickly, cumulative impact is the impact of the environment which results from the incremental impact of the action, this project, when added to other past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future actions. So when you combine the impact of 563 New Scotland Avenue with its
1 minute remains, sir.
Okay, with its 188 units, when you have the proposal at 1211 Western Avenue with its 136 dwelling units, you're over the threshold for type 1 actions of 200 residential units. And for that reason, so when you combine this 188 with 136, and then with the other impacts at 237 Western Avenue and the development at the old Palladium, which has 110 units, you can see that the environmental impacts like water, traffic, air, and noise are going to be significant. And for that reason, we would like this to be considered a type 1 action under SECR for both the planning board when they make their declaration and for the zoning board when they make theirs. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Margie Sheehan.
Hello, I'll be brief. I would like to request, my name is Margie Sheehan. I live at 32 Buckingham Drive, and I've been a resident of the city of Albany for almost 19 years. I would like to request that the board consider a moratorium on all building and rezoning proposals that are before the board until two things have occurred. One, we understand that the planning board has submitted some, or is in the process of submitting some 18 pages of revisions to zoning regulations, and we believe that the board, as well as the public, needs an opportunity to review all of that material. And two, there is a traffic study that's being done, paid for by the St. Peter's Hospital. We've had 2 meetings that the public was invited to, and we've heard nothing else yet about another meeting. So until we have some resolution on what's to be done with regard to traffic, I think it's very difficult for any decisions to be made there. Personally, I don't mind the idea of improvements. I think it's a wonderful concept. I look to an area like Restaurant Navona along New Scotland, where Restaurant Navona, the Ale and Oyster, the Gastropub, that whole area just looks beautiful, and there's really nice cafe seating outside, and I think those businesses have done a wonderful job of really renovating that area and creating a real walkable, beautiful space that fits perfectly within the city of Albany. I think the idea of a 5-story building, or God forbid anything higher, across from St. Peter's really threatens the whole, livability aspect of our city, and I personally am very much against it. I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Fred Pfeiffer?
Pfeiffer.
Pfeiffer? I apologize. I know. And I lost it that quick.
Good evening. My name's Fred Pfeiffer, and you're forgiven. It's a hard name to pronounce. I live at 124 North Pine Avenue in Albany. I've been in Albany, 45 years. Lived in just about every neighborhood, I think. What I'm here tonight to speak about is the living wage ordinance, and I hope that it'll be passed, because I really think that a compliance committee will involve more citizens into monitoring what our subcontract workers are getting for the city. But more than that, we'll set the benchmark for what a living wage is, and also continue the conversation about wages, and also housing, health insurance, time off for illness, all the things that so many of our citizens here in Albany have struggled for and don't necessarily have. I've seen a lot of poverty in the city over the years, and there's still a lot of poverty in the city, notwithstanding that some of the neighborhoods are becoming more consumer-oriented business, fun places to be. I live near the strip on Madison Avenue, and I'm really happy to see the improvements. But I think if we're going to reach all the residents of the city, we have to start examining the percentages of people who are coming out of poverty and starting to own their own houses and becoming citizens because of the responsibilities that they have once they're successful. And I think that that's really what living wage lifestyle is all about. I see also that there's a consideration of a resolution to not charge the Poor People's Campaign for when we block the streets. That was there. I think that's important too, because it also recognizes that they're frustrated about the lack of moving people out of poverty. And incrementally, I think we've done that, but not enough. We still have a divided, two-faced city because of that, and we all need to come together. And this is one way. So pass that ordinance, get a good compliance committee moving on it, so we can talk about the questions and examine the contracts, so that we can be proud of what we have. And just one other thing, the Honest Weight Food Co-op just enacted that they have a program to have a living wage for all their workers there, and it looks like their living wage is pegged just exactly as what the wage is now from when we passed this ordinance in '06 and had the cost of living increase tacked onto it each year. So I think we're on the right track. Please pass that ordinance, and appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Marlon Anderson?
Good evening, members of the public, members of the council. My name, of course, is Marlon Anderson, community advocate, currently residing at 214 Lark Street in the Center Square region of the city of Albany. I'm going to touch on two subjects very briefly before I speak on what I came to speak on. First things first, it's interesting of all the commotion and concern about the overdevelopment and the ineffective development in areas like the upper area of Western Avenue and New Scotland Avenue. And this is something that I warned about years ago when they were considering the restructuring of this Park South neighborhood. And I warned about the engineering of communities and things of that nature. But again, it was something that didn't impact other communities at this time, so their concerns were very little and were not expressed. But that's an example of when you think that something that's in one part of the city is not going to affect you, eventually it does. So hopefully the lesson is learned and you express better concern about the city as a whole when issues you think aren't affecting you, because in the end, those issues will affect you. And you can go to the Chines Union Search Engine and see my views on the ineffective development. Basically, developers have to be put to a standard of core development and stop running from the core of this city and developing the core of this city as opposed to running towards the suburbs and developing towards the suburbs, avoiding the core of the city. That's called ineffective development. Secondly, as far as the living wage and things concerned, the wages aren't the issue. The wages are the highest in America they've ever been. It's just that the services and the goods are outpriced. We need to look at things like rent control in the city of Albany, because the rents in the city of Albany are getting outrageous. If you live in the section where I live, you have $1,000 studio apartments. $1,000 for one room. And that's outrageous. No one can afford to live in a $1,000 one-room apartment. A 3-bedroom apartment where I live at is almost $3,000. Who can afford to live in $3,000 with kids? That's what the problem is, not the wages. It's the services that are being provided. And we need to control those services if we're going to control things like homelessness and poverty and things of that nature. It's not the wages, it's the prices of the goods and services. But what I've come forward to speak about is what I've been pursuing for a long time in this city, and that is leadership that needs to be had in the communities. We've came to a watershed moment in the last few weeks in this city where begrudgingly the council has stepped forward and tried to show a measure of leadership. And that's a good thing, because we have a community that is crying out for it. There's a void of leadership in our communities. They're desperately hoping for it. And I would hope that the council continues upon the path that they started in the last few weeks, not with small steps, but with the giant steps that are required. I would ask all of you, deploy to your communities as the summer approaches, as the warm weather approaches. Be seen, lead in the community, create events in the community, pursue those communities. Be out there among the people, not among the organizations and neighborhood associations, people that are easily reached, but the people that you aren't reaching, the people that need to see you, the people that need to feel your presence. Deploy into the communities. Be seen this summer. Lead this summer. If you hold small events in your facilities, leadership. Lead this community. Show them that you are there for them, because that's what's missing in this city. Myself, as I said, I'm going to be here in support, but I am going to step away for a while.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to step away for a while and observe the process. I will be keeping an eye on things, but I'm leaving the process to you, because you are the elected leaders in this city. There's a void of leadership there, and it's time for you to step up and fill it. And I certainly hope you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Charlene Schaffer.
Good evening, Common Council members. My name is Charlene Schaffer. I am a steering committee member of the Albany Normanskill Neighborhood Association. About 2 years ago, the Neighborhood Association sent out a survey to poll neighbors about issues that they may have while living in our neighborhood. The number one issue was traffic on New Scotland Road. Either the traffic circles and Slingerlands move the traffic faster into the city, or there is just more traffic driving into the city. Sometimes it takes up to 20 minutes to enter or cross New Scotland Road. The Neighborhood Association has asked the City of Albany Traffic Safety Department to send a representative to speak and address the traffic problem at the June 2018 meeting. After 3 phone calls and 2 emails, I was contacted and told they would not speak at our June meeting, that it was after their normal tour of duty hours. Now, with the new Department of Correction expansion project adding about 266 more people, there will be more traffic problems. At the March 27th Neighborhood Association meeting with the Department of Corrections, there were many questions left unanswered concerning traffic, speed bumps, sidewalks, and a stop sign on McCormick Road, and sewer and water issues. The Department of Corrections could not answer all of these questions, as we were told that some of these issues were the City of Albany's responsibilities. The Albany Normanskill Neighborhood Association asked that the Common Council advise the City of Albany Traffic and Safety and Sewer and Water Departments speak at our June 5th meeting and answer the questions. I thank you, and I look forward to your support and urging these 2 departments to come and speak at our June 5th meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Edie Brennan.
Good evening. My name's Ed Brennan. I live at 389 McCormick Road in the city of Albany. I live across the street from the Department of Corrections training facility and with the construction that's going on there. And like most residents in our neighborhood, we're very unhappy about the docks expansions plans. First of all, docks provided no notice to anybody in our residential neighborhood about this project. Nobody knew about it until the fences went up in January. And they've ignored the value of the input from into this whole planning process. And it's come to our realization that people in the city did know about this project. Apparently they'd been in touch with people, at least in the water department, possibly also in the planning department. And I understand that people in this room didn't even know about it. So as a matter of course, the common council should look into what kind of communication is going on in the city here, that such a huge project could be happening years in advance, because this was all funded years ago, that nobody knew what was happening until the fences went up. Second, they're adding hundreds of new parking spaces that by design are going to vastly increase the traffic, specifically on McCormick Road, which is already a very dangerous road. And the docks entrance on McCormick Road, we would like to see that closed. McCormick Road is the only means of ingress and egress for residents that live on McCormick Road, Highfield Lane, Fairway Court, Roland Drive, Quadrini Drive, Valley View Drive, and Meadow Lane. Everybody in this whole section needs to come in and out on McCormick Road. Docks, in addition to the McCormick Road entrance, they've got 3 entrances on New Scotland Avenue. They don't need this other entrance. We've had a long-standing problem with trainees and the docks driving way too fast on McCormick Road. By its very nature, since McCormick Road is a very long straight road with a light at the end, people get out, they get in their cars, they see the light. If it's a green light, they put the pedal to the metal to try to make the light. If it's a red light, I guess they're trying to time the light again, they put the pedal to the metal and they drive way too fast down McCormick Road. One child has already been killed on McCormick Road right by the Department of Corrections entrance. There's no sidewalk on McCormick Road. If for some reason this entrance gets left open for this new expansion in docks should be paying for a sidewalk or a multi-use path along McCormick Road. Docks contended in their late March meeting that a couple of people here attended, that the increased parking and housing of more trainees on site will reduce traffic because they will only need to drive in once at the start of their weekly program and drive out once at the end of the weekly program. That is a misleading, one-sided gross oversimplification. In the course of that meeting in late March, the docks people let slip that the trainees are free to leave at the end of every day. So 6 o'clock, they're in and they're out. They need to come back again by curfew time. So there's going to be way more traffic on McCormick Road. And furthermore, the increased staff that they've got at the Docks Training Center, they're free to come and go anytime. And if you look at the design of the way they put in these hundreds of new parking spaces, they're putting the parking spaces in the back of their facility and close to McCormick Road, so that just by very nature of the easiest way to get in and out, they're going to be coming out on McCormick Road rather than New Scotland, because if they go to get to New Scotland Avenue, they'd have to drive through other parking lots and deal with people backing in and backing out. Instead, the easiest way out is going to be McCormick Road. In addition, another problem with the parking lot in the rear facility is it's way too close to the residences on Wood
You have a
Terrace.
minute remaining, sir.
1 minute? Okay. Wood Terrace and Talmadge Avenue. It's a sort of a military-type facility. They wanted to put their parade ground right outside their dormitory. So instead of putting the parking lot by their new dormitory, they put it in the backyard of all the people that live on Wood Terrace and Talmadge Avenue. Simply resolve issues like this could have been resolved, if they had some community input, but they completely ignored us. Let's see. Skip over that. Another issue that we've got is the newly impermeable land from the parking lots and the new buildings. They're going from, it's being tripled from about 1.8 acres of impermeable land to 5.2 acres of impermeable land. We've already had a lot of trouble with drainage in the area. There's been a collapse of the ravine along McCormick Road. Part of McCormick Road actually slipped into the ravine, and this is only going to make it worse. There was no complete environmental impact study. They got away with it.
Time is up, sir.
All done? Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Suzanne Waltz.
Hello. My name is Suzanne Waltz. I live at 979 New Scotland Road, Albany, New York. I am a member of the Albany Normanskill Neighborhood Association and a part of our steering committee. My family has owned our property since 1941, so we are well established in the community. Let me give you some history and then present some facts to ponder. Let me give you some, the site where the Department of Corrections Training Academy now sits was originally a seminary, a place where young men came to contemplate their future as Catholic priests. They prayed and meditated in silence, and they walked over the land. It was situated on a large tract of land to keep it peaceful and apart from the residential homes that surrounded it. Then Docks purchased it. Docks is the Department of Correctional Services. Now there are slamming car doors at 6 a.m., soon to be close to 300, we are told. They will all be starting at the same time because they are trainees. They will be using the facilities, the water, the toilets, the showers, all at the same time because it is a training facility. There are screaming cadences yelled out at all hours. There is a hotel-like structure to be built, tapping into the city's water and sewer lines. The once peaceful field bordering McCormick Road is to be elevated, sending runoff water who knows where. McCormick Road itself collapsed at one point, due partially to previous work done at this site. No environmental impact study was done. CT Mail was hired by Corrections. They did a negative impact study and said no environmental study needed to be done. Old growth trees holding back embankments have been ripped out. Excuse me. Before the size and scope of the project was increased, that's when the negative statement was done. So since they've increased the project from 150 to 300, there has been no study on the environmental impact therein. There was an attempt to just close off Wood Terrace, a city street, without a review by the city engineers. When asked by Docs for a copy of the negative impact statement, we were told to go foil it. Even though under Article 6 NYCRR 617.12B3, all CEQA documents and notices, including but not limited to EAFs, negative declarations, positive declarations, scopes, notices of completion of an EIS, EISs, notices of hearings and findings
You have 1 minute left, ma'am.
must be maintained, in the files that they are readily accessible to the public and made available on request. And yet the city states there are no documents, and the corrections representatives say foil it. Today I will sum up by serving to remind this body that there have been several Normanskill bank collapses due to poorly conceived construction projects. They have caused extensive damage along the creek and to homeowners' property. Our beautiful golf course has sustained damage as well. It cost the city millions of dollars. Now there are flood watch cameras placed on New Scotland Bridge between Albany and Bethlehem. These collapses have, as I said, cost the city millions, and yet no environmental impact study is needed?
Ma'am, time is up, ma'am.
That is
Just finish your
what
sentence.
Bethlehem engineers said too before the last collapse. Until this is resolved, until our elected officials and city departments start stepping up, we will be back. And we will be back
Thank you.
in many different forms. Thank
Thank you,
you
ma'am.
for listening to me.
Thank you. Mr. Conti, we've reached our 30-minute mark in public comment period.
Thanks, Mr. President. I'd make a motion that we extend the public comment period for an additional 30 minutes.
All those in favor? And due to the number of people we do have signed up for public comment period, and we would like to hear all of you, since it's only extended to 30 minutes, we have 12 more people to speak. Can you please have your we'll have it, cut it down to 3 minutes. And if, other people don't take 3 minutes, I'll keep the clock up here and I might let some go further than 3 minutes if other people don't take as long. So public comment period is extended, but for 3 minutes per person, since we have so many people signed up. So can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Good evening. My name is Terry Waltz. My residence is at number 1 Fairway Court in Albany, but I'm a double lottery winner with the Docks Project. My husband and I also own our original home that we bought when we got married on 19 Wood Terrace. And that address, 19 Wood Terrace, may ring a bell with some of you if you were involved in the exchange of documents which were sent out directly from the state, inappropriately based on city procedures, but we'll gloss over that for the moment, stating that our driveway was going to be sealed and not sealed, but closed for 4 days of this work. This was not an inquiry, this was a declaration. We're going to close your driveway for 4 days. Wonderful. We had an email exchange with Docks, and it came out that that decision had been taken with no consultation with the city departments involved with traffic. And that soon changed. Clearly there was some culpability on the part of the state since the project was moved back a week. This happened after the appearance of Docks representatives, and these were some high-level guys, okay, you can recognize them, at a community meeting with almost 200 people in attendance, at which Docks assured us repeatedly that there were takeaways from the meeting and that they were going to be good neighbors. I don't know what their definition of being a good neighbor is, but it's not congruent with mine. We have been asked to foil information which is legally required to be supplied to the public. Not only once, but numerous times. I have an email chain if anyone wants to see it. They've been acting without any consultation or approval with the city. The city, however, is probably not blameless in this either. Somebody had to know about this. A $40 million project plus $3 million for design and $3 million for management does not spring up full-grown and magnificent in 5 days. Someone knew about this. So, as has been suggested previously, we need to take a good look at the channels of communication. Why is the public not being informed about this? Okay? As taxpayers, we have that right, and you have that responsibility to us. The city, had it acted earlier to include the public, would not have been powerless. I'm going to take you to Asia for a moment. Remember Hong Kong? Hong Kong was a British colony for over 100 years, or just about 100 years. And it was just given back to China lock, stock, and barrel in 1997. They didn't have to do that. They had a perpetual lease on the island of Hong Kong, some of the most valuable real estate in the world. Why did they give it back? Water. They had no way to get water when that lease expired on neighboring land. The city would have been in a position to make very great demands on this project and on the state's
You have 1 minute remaining.
scope of action, had action been taken earlier to include more people in the process. I'm not saying that the council is specifically culpable for this. We don't know who knew and who didn't know. But at this point, there has been very little public notification. What there has been is not being complied with. They're not being good neighbors. Appearing at a meeting, many of our electeds did us the courtesy of coming to the meeting, and that was greatly appreciated. But we need something more from you. Appearing at a meeting is wonderful and it shows support, but we need action. We're just little people. We're up against the state of New York. They are accustomed to doing as they wish to do it, when they wish to do it with no consultation. So at this time, I'm calling on the Common Council, my councilmen and everyone else on the council to come together, because this time it may not be in your backyard, but next year it could be.
Time's
Thank
up.
you.
Thank you. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Good evening. My name is Christine Wasik, and I'm also a member of the Norman Skill Neighborhood Steering Committee, Neighborhood Association Steering Committee. My home is at 1 Cayuga Court, and we've lived there for 16 years. And prior to that, owned a home on Holmes Court for 11 years. So you can see that we're committed to living and working in the city of Albany. Although recently my husband's company has moved out of the city. I'm concerned about the dock's expansion for many reasons. only have a certain amount of time tonight, but hopefully between my other steering committee members, have covered a lot of them. We pay the highest taxes in the city and have highest voter turnout. I'm concerned about my property value. With the increase in the building and the number of people living round the clock on the dock's property, the destruction of the green space and increased water problems will only decrease the value of my home. My home sits at the bottom of the hill from the property. We already have a continuously soggy backyard despite having put in an extensive drainage system at our expense. 1 block below us, the field between Mohican and McCormick is also constantly wet, and as soon as it rains, the area, which includes a pump station at the bottom of the hill, becomes flooded. No environmental studies have been done, and so we don't even know the full impact of this project on the surrounding land and water. Unless you stand at the top of the hill, you don't realize how high that hill is. We have already had landslides in the Albany area and around the Normanskill, and you recall the car wash on Delaware Ave and the Normanside Country Club into Albany. And I'm concerned that it is inevitable that there will be another cave-in such as these somewhere due to the nature of our soil and the stress on the land. With the increase of construction, loss of green space, addition of buildings, and concrete parking lots, this issue will only get worse for me and my neighbors. I feel for the people who live at the top of Talmadge Place and those on McCormick, not only because of the current construction in their backyard, but what is to come, a parking lot for more people each week to sit in their cars in the evening with exhaust running, car alarms going off, and less natural land to absorb the water and ultimately runs down into the yards on Seneca and Cayuga.
You have 1 minute remaining.
We have asked docks if this must move forward to change the plan and reposition the parking lot so it is not so close to the homes. I'm concerned about impact of the water use with the large number and increase of people who are going to be on the premises, showering and flushing at concurrent times, impacting water pressure and stress on the antiquated Albany sewer systems. I'm also concerned about the already taxed resources of the city, police, fire, paramedic, being called out for all the additional people there 24 hours, taking away from the citizens in our neighborhood, having to probably pull from other neighborhoods and then affecting all the neighborhoods in the city. And then also what disturbs me is the lack of interest by the elected officials. I would question, they seem to have all but disappeared since our neighborhood association began to demand information. We've received sarcastic responses from the mayor's office, and city department officials who have refused to discuss the issue with us.
Ma'am, your time's up, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you have something in writing, ma'am, if you have that in writing, you want us to read it, I mean, you can make copies and we can pass it out to council members as well. Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, if you have written testimony when you come testify, because you didn't finish, if anybody wants us, we can make copies and they'll be given to all the council members. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Good evening. My name is Vincent Riguso. I live at 13 Beach Avenue, Albany, New York. I'd like to have a moratorium put on the USDO. There's many reasons, but first and foremost, I attended quite a few meetings on the USDO, and all my questions were brought up, and they told me that I would have a chance in 6 months to ask the same questions, and they would answer them. Here it is, 2 years after that, and they just gave the Common Council amendments to the USDO. Never once did they bring the public in to say what was wrong with the USDO. I don't have to tell this council what's wrong with the USDO. You just heard from behind me what's wrong with the USDO. There isn't a happy neighborhood around here anymore. This USDO is ruining the city. So Where is the public review? Where's the public review? Anybody? Nobody. They sent the Common Council amendments. If you didn't understand the 340-page USDO, that's it's not an insult. It's just that it's way beyond all of us. So how are you going to do the amendments? If I just can't believe that they sent this Common Council the amendments without first having Chris Spencer come up here and tell you what amendments are going to replace and why. And then you will know just the amendments what it is. This should not be before you. I mean, if this USDO was good for Albany, I would not have the following problems that Mr. Conti, Ms. Dorchette, Jack Flynn, Tom Hoey, O'Brien, and I go. These are the upper wards where these humongous buildings are being built. So this USDO is not for us. And something that was just put out by the planning department, which I thought was hilarious, it said, telling me that the USDO was established in May of 2017. It came effective of June of 2017 after 2.5 years in doing this. And then it says that the USDO was adopted with a built-in 6-month evaluation period.
You have 1 minute remaining, Mr.
It
Russo.
took a year. We're on to 2 years now. We never had no evaluation period, no 6 months evaluation period. If you look at 1211 Western Avenue, there's so many things wrong with 1211 Western Avenue. First, the seeker. If you ask them how come they don't have a full-blown seeker, they tell you, this is a planning department, well, they don't need it. Miss Baker from the DEC says, anything with the word apartment in needs a full-blown seeker, but not this building. The storm and water, wastewater, where's it going? You ask Joe Coffey, it's going down to the Woodville pump station. The Woodville pump station's got a big sign on it, says, a moratorium put on by DEC. But Joe Coffey said the water's going there. And the high voltage wires. Our fire chief wrote a 3-page letter to the planning department that said no work is to be done in that building until the overhead wires are buried. So what's the interpretation that the planning department has? They can take the building down, they can build a new building.
Your time's up, Mr. Russo.
And then when the occupancy permit is granted, then they bury the wires. What happens if National Grid comes back at that time and says, you can't bury the wires? So I got 7 utilities overhead, and you expect our firemen to go in there and fight a fire if it was to happen.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Russo.
thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me, Mr. President, can I just briefly, I think it's important to clarify the point that Mr. Ragusa made. The council does not formally have the USDO amendments at this point. They're still before the planning board, and there is a planning board hearing. And once the planning board completes their review and makes their recommendations,
Then we'll get
it will come to the council,
For
and
the
then we will go through our process as well. But we don't formally have them at this point.
Gotcha. Thank you, Mr. Conti. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Nancy Benedict.
My name is Nancy Benedict. I live at 31 Forest Road in Delmar. I'm the chairman of Citizens for Public Transportation, and I participate practically every Tuesday in a TV program on Access TV on Channel Albany in regard to Citizens for Public Transportation. Now, what I'm here to talk about is I think you need more money for the Access TV studio, Channel Albany, called PEG for Public Education and Government Channel. We now have only one part-time coordinator who's the only paid employee of the Access TV channel. His name is Kirk Daniels, and he's doing a very good job. He's good at his job, but he has an awful lot to do, and he's only a part-time employee. He does have an intern working with him, but the interns he had a young man working with him for a while, and now he has a young woman. But as I understand it, the way these interns work is they work until they put in a certain number of hours, and then they're out, and maybe, if he's lucky, he'll get another one to replace the one he has now. Now, we have been told that we may in the future have to have each group who does TV programs have a member of their group operate all the cameras. But I think that would seriously impair our ability to produce a really good show that appeared anything like a professional job if we had to have members of our group doing the work with the cameras. Ideally, the coordinator of the studio should have some time to talk to community groups and try to get more people to do TV shows so they would have more different programs.
You have 1 minute left, ma'am.
Okay, and Keith Irish at our meeting this afternoon told us about a job want ad on the internet for Pittsfield, Massachusetts for a person to work with their TV studio. They were offering that person between $42,000 and $47,000 a year based on their experience. They would be working 40 hours a week, and they would be offered health care. And that, that person would be an outreach person. He wouldn't even be the head of the TV studio. He would be under the head of the TV studio, and Pittsfield is a much smaller city than Albany, and if they can offer that to a person who's under the head of the studio, who's an assistant, whose job is basically outreach, I don't see why a city the size of Albany can't offer that much to a full and have a full-time person for the coordinator of the studio. Thank
Ma'am,
you.
your time's up. Thank you. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Dennis Carius.
Thank you. Dennis Carius, 13 York Road, Albany, New York. I want to second the motion for what Nancy was just saying, because when we did our, we said we really respect in this country our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. We have freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and I just wanted to ask, there's no reason for our channels to go away. We had channels 16, 17, and 18 on Spectrum. Now, they did move it up to 1301, 1302, and 1303, but if you could just ask Spectrum, why would our channels 16, 17, and 18 disappear? To me, it's only because we would tell the truth if you're getting brainwashed by mainstream media, because channels 6, 10, and 13 also went up to 1200, 1203, and 1209, but you can still go to 6, 10, and 13. There are so many more channels today than there were decades ago. There's no reason for our channels 16, 17, and 18, public access, education, and government, to disappear unless they don't want you to get the truth if you're getting brainwashed by mainstream media. So if you could just ask Spectrum to put us back where we were, I really would appreciate it. I was happy to pledge allegiance to the flag for freedom of speech. I just would like to get back to the way we were in this country. Everybody in this room could do a TV show every week at no charge for Spectrum at the main branch of the Albany Public Library. The studio's right there. It's the only problem is, for no reason, they moved us way up there to 1301, 1302, and 1303, and that's okay, but why did our 3 channels disappear? If I go to channel 15 and press the up button, it jumps up to channel 19. There's nothing on 16, 17, and 18, so I just would like to reform things if they get dysfunctional. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Alana Klein.
Alana Klein, 29 Glenwood, 12208, not 12203. Mr. President, with the amount of speakers we had tonight, I realized that we were probably destined to go over the hour. I would ask to give everyone a fair shot. If this reduction to 3 minutes, that decision could be made before people begin to speak, because it doesn't seem fair to the dozen or so speakers that came after the extended time period. Also, in relation to that, I see a lot of people here tonight. As you know, I've always been a big fan of transparency in government, and that's what Mr. Hoey's local law B does, so I hope that passes unanimously. To my main point, I'm not an expert on fire, water, police, and traffic and developments and stuff like that, but it seems that certain areas of Albany, there seems to be a real NIMBY, not in my backyard attitude. And I actually saw something that I found kind of comical acronym the other day. Banana, build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. And I'm not saying to overdevelop every single aspect of this neighborhood so that the entire city looks like it's some kind of metropolis at a Sim City. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we can't be afraid of development, of increasing our tax base. And the main reason I'm coming here tonight is because I really wish I was done talking about this, but 372 New Scotland, there was another incident. A couple months ago, someone on this side of the banister told me that a couple council members felt like I was taking the issue too personally. Well, let me ask you, who is taking this too personally? Either me, the person who's fighting for their friends' rights to move into an area which was zoned and passed the Board of Zoning Appeals, or the person who filed an appeal, threatened to file a lawsuit against the city.
You have a minute remaining.
Filed an ordinance to reduce the signage in a square footage, reduce the square footage of signage in a front yard, which you wasn't planning to use that whole square footage anyways. And now I hear that someone anonymously, I'm not saying who it was because I don't have any proof of that, but someone anonymously apparently filed a complaint with the planning department that Kathleen was doing unauthorized renovations and improvement inside her building, actually had the building inspected, passed with full compliance. This is bordering on harassment. And again, I'm not going to say who, but someone in this room instigated it all, and someone in this room can make it stop. Vaccinate your kids, believe survivors, boycott the NRA, Black Lives Matter. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Annie Murray.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Miss. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Helene Brown. Oh, did she leave? She left. Susan Du Bois.
Hello, my name is Susan Du Bois. I live at 24 Jeanette Street in Albany, and I'd like to thank the members of the council for their interest in updating the living wage ordinance and getting that process back on track. I think it's a good thing that the city adopted quite a few years ago now, and I hope the legislation will pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
Rohan Grant.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. As this is my first time here, this is weird, okay? Where I come from, West Hill. Most people, I read the map and everything. For me, it's from Broadway all the way up to Waterville. Waterville is where I started when I got here, but I'm not going to get into that. Let me get to the point. All right, I've heard a lot of complaints. And from sitting up here, it's a lot different than sitting back in the corner with my boy Scully. All right? I'm looking at you guys, and I'm like, you guys should be tired right now. Okay? There's a lot of complaints from a lot of people who are getting a lot of support, a lot of funding, a lot of planning, and they don't want it. However, where I come from, I've seen some magic this weekend. I've seen this lady over here, Miss Joyce. Didn't know her name, but I knew she looked familiar. This was her intro on my community, where I live, West Hill. First, 12 came out. They toned the noise down. Next, they set up around the corner coffee, donuts, rakes, shovels, bags, gloves. Nobody said a word. They basically went down to First Street. There's this gray house. They went behind this gray house. They did what nobody in our community did, and they was looking colorful too. Okay? They cleaned it. They fixed the fence. They didn't stop there. They came around the block, cleaned that. They went across the street, cleaned that all the way back to where they started. The community, basically, because of their introduction, didn't know who they was, why they came, why do they care, what the heck was going on. You're interrupting our lives, okay? We can't figure this out. You're black and we don't trust you because you're doing things that we do and you act like you care and we don't think so. However, by the time they got done, they did more work than Albany has done in a long time. And to see where they came from, okay, I can go back to my people and tell them, say, look, the city came out and they put their hands together. Nobody on the block realized the logistics that went into letting this thing happen. Okay, I could go further into it, but I'm gonna pretend I don't know. Okay, the logistics, we got DGS working together. We got APD working together. We got the block clear. We got people aware. Sorry.
1 minute remaining.
I'll make it quick. We got people aware of what's going on. And my last statement is, if all the way over there on New Scotland, which if people don't wake up, okay, you got Albany Med, make it brief. Okay, Albany Med has become a new city. Okay, we're proud of that. I'm proud of that. My kids are born at St. Peter's. They want to bring that feel where the professions and everything is close to where we get our health. Minor inconvenience, but forget about them. They don't want it. Over where I come from, you tear down a building, we celebrate. You fix a road, we celebrate. Okay, anything you do in West Hill, Arbor Hill, we celebrate. If you go over there right now, we celebrating because the sun came out and it wasn't raining. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can the clerk please call the next speaker?
This is the last speaker, Aldrin Hay. Did they leave? Aldrin Hay.
The last speaker is not here or left. At this time, public comment period is deemed closed. And now we move on to consideration of local laws. Mr. Hoey.
Mr. President, I think we'll do the minutes first.
You up? Oh, my goodness, that's right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, sir. So I'd like to 15th meeting.
Can we get a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Approval of previous minutes is passed. Thank you, Mr. Conti. Now moving on to considerations of local laws. Mr. Hoey.
Mr. President, I recognize local law B 2019 and ask for its vote by roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Can the clerk please read the local law?
A local law adding a new section 34-2, public notice of meetings of boards, commissions, and committees of Chapter 34 meetings of the Code of the City of Albany in relation to the noticing of a meeting of a public body.
Is there any discussion on the local law? Seeing none, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Anani?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Ballerin?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Conti? Ms. Dochette?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Ms. Fahey? Mr. Flynn?
Yes, co-sponsor.
Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Igo? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Kimbrough? Ms. Love? Mr. Robinson?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
12 in the affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Thank you. Local law passes. Moving on to reports of standing committees. Mr. Igo. Thank you, Mr. Conti. Mr. Kimbrough.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Human Rights Committee met on April 23rd to discuss amendments to the living wage ordinance. Amendments included adding council members ex officio member, quarterly meetings, quarterly reports from the Commissioner of Administrative Services to the council, chair of human resources, and city auditor. Was reported out of committee to the council with positive recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Kimbrough. Mr. Kimbrough, would you like to give this report of the Public Safety Committee?
Yes, on behalf of
Thank you.
Dr. Pleers for Public Safety. Public Safety met April 29th to discuss a plan to prevent violence for the summer of 2019. Various community stakeholders met. There were SNUG community members, APD, Albany Public Library, Green Tech High, Metropolitan Church. We spoke of collaborations. A lot of these groups are working hard at keeping the city safe and keeping violence down. There seemed to be a consensus that we continue to collaborate to control and keep the violence down. That was that meeting. Secondly, Public Safety met on May 31st to discuss the officer-involved incident on First Street. On March 16th, 2019. But we had the chief there. He answered some tough questions from both the community and council members. There was a general agreement among the committee members that the chief took the appropriate action in suspending the officer. It was appropriate for the incident. Also, the chief was unable to answer a lot of questions due to pending court action. The Public Safety Committee will continue to monitor that issue. Thank you.
Kimbrough. No other reports? Moving on to ordinances. Introduction of ordinances. Mr. Duche? Ms. Duche?
I'm sorry. introduce 10.51.19.
Can the clerk please read the ordinance?
An ordinance amending Chapter 375 of the Code of the City of Albany, Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance in relation to incentives for developers to use energy efficient and low impact designs.
Thank you. Mr. Conti.
Thank you, Mr. President. That ordinance is referred to the Planning Committee, and the remaining ordinances on the agenda are held with the exception of agenda item number 6 by Mr. O'Brien and agenda item number 7 and number 9 by myself.
Thank you, Mr. Conti.
Mr.
Idle.
President, may I be
Yes.
recognized? However, I believe that I am entitled to speak on the ordinance that was just introduced,
We've never.
according to our rules.
We've never.
Yeah, you want the planning, your ordinance, correct?
Yes.
Yes, you
That's
can.
correct.
Yes.
Under the rules, you can address that.
Right.
I guess I don't know if we withdraw the previous one and go back, but
Okay.
So I just,
the minutes will reflect
Miss-
what happened.
so I just want to speak briefly on the ordinance that I'm introducing. It is in the 17 pages of the summary document for the revisions to the USDO. I noticed that the Planning Department has recommended that we eliminate the incentive that allows an extra story almost by right when somebody uses blue or green roof technology. What they are looking to do is to temporarily stay that particular provision until the end of the year. Because it's not clear that how long it's going to take for us to review that actually 383-page document of amendments to the USDO, and because this is having such a significant impact on our communities where we have zoned areas for 3 stories or for 3.5 stories, and almost by right, people, because it's such an easy adjustment to make with limited acknowledged benefit to the city, that they then get to add an extra story to it. So it has significantly changed what was intended, I think, in the USDO. So I've taken that particular provision out, introduced it as an ordinance, and I've asked for it to be placed on the planning board agenda for this month so that we can then take immediate action on this and limit this. And actually I've asked for it to be limited through June of next year so that we have an opportunity then to take a look at it. It may be appropriate for us to go beyond this and look for a moratorium for certain types of construction in the city in certain areas, but I wanted to make people aware of the fact that I am looking to move this portion of it expeditiously. I do want to note also that when I was looking at this particular provision and looking at the USDO changes, and I've met with Brad Glass to go over some of my concerns about what they're looking to do in the 6-month review that is really now a 2-month review, I have noticed that for a 1/4 acre lot or less, you are required to retain 1 inch. If you're doing new development, you're required to retain 1 inch of water on the premises, and one of the ways in which you can do that, have the technology to do that, is through a blue or green roof. So we're, without any allowing them to add a story, exceed the setback requirements, et cetera, for smaller developers, we're already imposing something like this as a standard requirement. So the idea that we're giving some larger developers a whole extra story on their premises of, in their development is rather absurd. We have adopted the USDO, and there's a lot of it that makes a lot of sense. The problem is we're not following it. We're not following it. The planning board and the BZA are making exceptions all over the place. I don't think that most of us are opposed to development. We're opposed to excessive development. And when there's, variances being granted routinely, area variances to allow extra height, when there's these kind of incentives being allowed that we're seeing minimal benefit for, we need to take another look and we need to act expeditiously because the horse is out of the barn and we need to do this now.
Thank you, Ms. Duche. Mr. Igo.
Mr. President, on behalf of Mr. O'Brien, I notice Ordinance 6/2119 with amendments and ask for a roll call vote thereon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Igo. Can the clerk please read the ordinance?
An ordinance amending Article 1, removal of garbage, Article 2, recyclables, Article 4, litter, Article 5, vacant lots, and Article 10, 20? VA. Notice of violation of Chapter 313 Solid Waste of the Code of the City of Albany in relation to the adjudication of penalties for violations.
Is there any discussion on the ordinance? Seeing none, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Anani?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Ballerin?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Conti? Ms. Dochette? Ms. Fahey? Mr. Flynn? Mr. Hoey?
Yes, co-sponsor.
Mr. Igo? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Kimbrough? Ms. Love? Mr. Robinson? 12 in the affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Ordinance passes. Mr. Conti.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed ordinance 7.21.19 with amendment, request passage, and a roll call vote thereon.
Can the clerk please read the ordinance?
An article amending Article 3, Regulation and Control of Traffic during snow and other natural emergencies of Chapter 359, Vehicles and Traffic of the Code of the City of Albany in relation to parking during a declared snow emergency.
Is there any discussion on the ordinance? Seeing none, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Anani? Mr. Ballerin?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Conti? Ms. Dochette? Ms. Fahey? Mr. Flynn? Mr. Hoey?
Yes, co-sponsor.
Mr. Igo? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Kimbrough? Ms. Love? Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
12 in affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Ordinance passes. Mr. Conti.
Thank you, Mr. President. I noticed ordinance 9.4119 with amendment, request passage, and a roll call vote thereon.
Can the clerk please read the ordinance?
An ordinance amending Article 20, General Provisions of Chapter 42, Departments and Commission of the Code of the City of Albany in relation to the setting of a living wage standard for covered employees working on a service contract in the City of Albany and to set reporting requirements thereof.
Is there any discussion on the ordinance? Mr. Conti?
Thank you, Mr. President. This ordinance is really intended to try and reinvigorate the living wage ordinance, which has kind of gone through a period of dormancy, get it back on track, make sure we're in compliance, provide more information to the council in terms of service contracts that included, make sure that we are providing accessible information in terms of what the living wage number is. So this is the first step in terms of moving forward. Next step, the mayor really does need to appoint a new compliance committee that we hope that should be representative of the community, including representation from organized labor, as we continue to move forward. I want to thank the people who spoke tonight and who also spoke at the Human Resources Committee in support, and hopefully working together we can make some progress on this issue. And so I'd ask for members' support on this tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Onani.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand here in support of Ordinance 94119, which amends our city living wage law in relations to entities which contract with the City of Albany. Quite frankly, I believe that it's important that we set an example. Simply put, we should only work with businesses that are committed to paying a living wage. This legislation adds some key revisions to ensure our city is consistent, including language which aligns with the living wage requirements with inflation. In addition, providing a compliance committee with more responsibility for oversight and enforcement of this law. Quite frankly, the current minimum wage is the reason many people are living in poverty. Healthcare costs are going up, childcare costs are going up, college costs are going up, housing costs are going up. But wages for many working people in our city are not going up. On a personal note, I worked at several minimum wage jobs, my first being at Pizza Hut. And there's this perception that many people that work at these minimum wage jobs are young college students or teenagers who are just trying to earn a few dollars. But that's not true. My time at Pizza Hut, we had single mothers, we had grandparents who were working 50+ hours just to make ends meet. And they still had some still had to depend on government assistance. It's important, again, that we set an example. The history of this amendment, and a couple of months ago, Tom Hoey and a few of our colleagues stood in the rain with the Mohawk EMT as they were asking for a living wage. Currently, some EMT workers here at Mohawk Ambulance are being paid $11.25 an hour, $11.50 an hour. These are individuals who are called at a moment's notice to save lives. I believe that they deserve better, and I asked Mohawk Ambulance to pay the EMTs a living wage. Quite frankly, public policy is about the people. And, sometimes we have to make decisions at all times to make sure that it's impacting the residents. And whenever individuals like ourselves can help the public help themselves, we should take full advantage of it. And quite frankly, I believe that government can't solve all the problems, but I believe that government has a role to help individuals help themselves. And I'm not naive about our role as government officials. JFK once said, things do not happen, things are made to happen. So again, I want to thank the sponsors of these amendments, my colleague Conti, Tom Hoey, and also Kathy Fahey. Simply put, these revisions will make our city living wage law stronger, and I fully support the passage of this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Anani. Mr. Hoey.
I want to thank my colleague, Councilman Anani, for those kind words. And I know my colleague, Jack Flynn, was also at the Mohawk ambulance walk-in. We got a problem where we make laws and we don't stay with them. We don't re-examine them. After a while, we kind of think that they're going to work by themselves. So I really appreciate that we were able to get this legislation done into committee, and good public comment, and moving forward. And I just want to talk about Mohawk Ambulance. It is very difficult to become an EMT. It takes a long process. It's almost as hard as becoming a physician's assistant. It takes a lot of studying, and to dedicate yourself to that, and then graduate and get a job at $11 or $12 an hour, it's really an insult to people studying, trying to make them better lives. So we are hoping that this will impact the Mohawk Ambulance's workers. Thank you.
Mr. Hoey. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Ballard.
I rise in support of this, and I commend my colleagues for pushing this agenda. I think it's important that we hold those who we contract with accountable. Many of us today cannot afford to live on a 40-hour work week. Most of us have to have multiple jobs just to make ends meet. So it's critical that we keep those who contract with us, that get our tax dollars, accountable to making sure that their employees, their staff, have a fair wage and it's being treated properly and fairly. So I commend my colleagues, and I am proud to be in support of this.
Thank you. Seeing no others, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Anani?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Ballerin?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Conti? Ms. Dorchette?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Ms. Fahey? Mr. Flynn? Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Igo? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Kimbrough? Ms. Love? Okay. Mr. Robinson?
Yes, co-sponsor.
12 in the affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Ordinance passes. Moving on to introduction of resolutions. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I notice resolution 19.51.19R and I ask for its passage.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
A resolution authorizing the mayor to execute the master contract and required deed easement necessary in order to receive an award from the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation's Title IX of the Environmental Protection Act of 1993 grant program and to accept such funds.
Is there any discussion on the resolution? Seeing none, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Anani?
Yes.
Mr. Ballerin?
Yes.
Mr. Conti? Ms. Dochette? Ms. Fahey? Mr. Flynn? Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Igo? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Kimbrough? Ms. Love? And Mr. Robinson. 12 in the affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Resolution passes. Ms. Doche?
I notice resolution 20.51.19R as amended and ask for its passage.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution of the Common Council consenting to an adjustment in salary for certain positions for the 2019 budget. Albany Police Officers Union, Local 2841, Law Enforcement Officers Union, Council 82, AFSCME, AFL-CIO, Communications.
Is there any discussion on the resolution? Mr. Hoey?
Yes, I'm glad to see this contract finally come up for, get approved and for us to fund it. They were without a contract since 2014, and these are hard workers. These are the people manning the phones when somebody's having a heart attack or there's a fire. They're the people who are answering and dispatching, making sure that people are helped. And they also help people on the phone, tell them what to do in an emergency type of situation. And I hope that we can, this contract only runs through the end of this year. I hope we can get another contract for them because they're hard workers. And they also have a severe staffing shortage. So I'm glad that this is finally here, and I hope we all vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Any other discussion? Seeing none, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Anani?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Ballerin?
Yes, co-sponsor, please.
Mr. Conti? Ms. Dochette?
Yes.
Ms. Fahey? Mr. Flynn? Mr. Hoey?
Yes, co-sponsor.
Mr. Igo? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Kimbrough? Ms. Love? And Mr. Robinson.
Yes.
12 in the affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Resolution passes. Mr. Conti?
Thank you. Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion requesting majority consent to add the following resolutions to tonight's agenda. 215119R, 225119R, and 235119R.
Is there a second on the motion? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Anani?
Thank you, Mr. President. I notice resolution 211519 and I ask for its passage.
Thank you, Mr. Anani. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution of the Common Council proclaiming May 2019 as Bike Month in the City of Albany.
Is there any discussion on the resolution? Mr. Anani?
Thank you, Mr. President. This resolution is in recognition of the fact that bicycling has grown to be an increasingly popular form of commuting and recreation, and that we as a city, in partner with state and local bicycle advocate groups, want to make sure that we continue building upon Albany's bike infrastructure and to promote bicycle safety on both of the cyclists and also vehicle owners. If our city is to move forward in sustainability, bicycling must be a part of the equation. And we as a city should do all we can to promote this healthy and ecological friendly mode of transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anani. Any further discussion? Seeing none, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Anani?
Yes.
Mr. Ballerin? Mr. Conti? Ms. Dochette? Ms. Fahey? Mr. Flynn? Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Igo? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Kimbrough? Ms. Love? And Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
12 in affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions, all co-sponsors?
Resolution passes. Mr. Robinson, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr.
Pardon.
President. No problem. I notice Resolution 22.5119R and asks for its introduction.
Thank you, sir. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
A resolution of the City of Albany's Common Council calling on the New York State Legislature to pass the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act and calling on the governor to sign such legislation into law.
Thank you. Mr. Conti?
Thank you, Mr. President. That resolution is referred to the Public Safety Committee.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson?
Thank you, Mr. President. I notice Resolution 23.5119R and asks for its introduction.
Thank you. Can the clerk please read the resolution?
A resolution of the City of Albany's Common Council calling on the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, DCJS, the New York State Office of Court Administration, and the Albany County District Attorney to work in unison to expunge the records of all City of Albany misdemeanor marijuana convictions in contemplation of the passing of the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act.
Thank you. Mr. Conti?
Thank you, Mr. President. That resolution is also referred to Public Safety, and the remaining resolutions are held with the exception of agenda item number 4.
Ms. Duche?
Yes, Mr. President, I notice Resolution 17.42.19R and ask for its passage.
Can the clerk please read the resolution?
Resolution of the Common Council consenting to an adjustment in salary for certain positions for the 2019 budget, Office of Assessment.
Is there any discussion on that resolution? Seeing none, can the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Anani?
Yes.
Mr. Ballerin? Mr. Conti? Ms. Dochette? Ms. Fahey? Mr. Flynn? Mr. Hoey?
Yes.
Mr. Igo? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Kimbrough? Ms. Love? Mr. Robinson? 12 in the affirmative, 0 negative, 0 abstentions.
Thank you. That concludes our portion of consideration resolution. Commissioner of Deeds, Mr. Kimbrough.
Thank you, Mr. President. I offer a list of names for appointment to Commissioner of Deeds and waive the reading of the names.
Do we have a second on that motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Mr. Conti?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make the following motion and request its adoption. Resolved that Danielle Gillespie is hereby appointed City Clerk and Clerk to the Common Council for a term ending December 31st, 2021, and be it further resolved that this appointment shall take effect Monday, May 20th, 2019.
Is there a second on the motion? All those in favor? Motion passes. Mr. Conti?
If there's no further, go ahead.
Ms. Love?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to acknowledge, I just want to say a few words on the young man that came down here and spoke on the street cleaning. That was Jamel Robinson's, he put that together. He acknowledged me because I kept offering him coffee and donuts, so he saw my face more than all. But also, we had several people out there helping us. Lillian Garland, Tabor, Jamel has his mother, his grandmother. There was Reverend Poindexter. There was a bunch of us out there. But the both of us decided that we want to take our streets back and we want to clean them up. So we'll have more in the future, but I just want to acknowledge him for coming down. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I do echo the sentiments of my colleague, Ms. Councilwoman Joyce Love. But the young man did mention something that was very striking and something that is an everyday occurrence and experience of the people in the West Hill, the West End neighborhoods, and that is not equitable development. As he said, that there are parts of our city that don't want any more development, and then there are parts of our city that are looking for more development. And so I want us, when we think about the policies that we pass and the policies that we make, to think about the residents of those communities that are affected by lack of a disinvestment in their neighborhoods.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Johnson.
And I just want to echo what Mr. Lagusa said. I think that it's a problem, and I'm sorry if I said his name wrong, but I think it's a problem that these discussions are going on and behind closed doors, and basically when they're presented to the community as well as the council is at the last minute. So that's something that has been problematic, and in my ward, people who are trying to make improvements to the current businesses are getting forced to do things in a manner that are views of people outside our community. So I find that problematic that they're telling one part of the city that they just made changes. Why would they make amendments? But then you hear in other parts of the city, there's multiple amendments being made. So I find that problematic, and I would hope that the council finds a way to either address it or at least let it be known that the people are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Igo, and then Mr. Hoey.
Mr. President, just to set the record straight, Mr. Robinson, we don't say we don't want development. We want appropriate development, and I've heard the same in the West Hill too over the years. Okay, so I just want to make that clear.
Thank you, Mr. Igo. Mr. Hoey.
Yeah, I was sitting here listening to people about 563 New Scotland, and I really feel sorry for them because they don't know what they're in for. We've been fighting this 1211 since before I took office, and it takes a toll. You find things wrong. I mean, I've found more things wrong, and you know, there's something wrong with the system right now. And I know we're working on it, and I appreciate Councilwoman Doucette about pulling out that, you know, the green-blue roofs. This is stuff that we have to look at. We have to look at this USDO. You know, I'm not against development, but we got to look at the whole city. We have Kenwood, which is going to have over 2,000 units. We have all these units going over, and if you add up the numbers, it's like 3,000, 4,000 units of being built. Where are the people coming from to fill these units? Now, it's a rumor. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that the Albany Med Park South is a little bit more than 1/3 full. And I mean, I don't know how to find that out if it's a private entity, but we're putting up all these buildings. Are they being used, and are they in the appropriate areas? So I think the discussion's great, and again, I hope I'm wrong, but I think a good look at development and what's appropriate and what's the area. And I'd like to add, we're developing more than what our infrastructure can handle. I sent out a note to all the council members. We've had over 55 backups of toilets, putting sewage in people's basements up in the 15th Ward. I drive down Hillcrest Avenue going into the state campus. Brand new road was just paved 3 years ago. There's 3 huge holes in it where the water mains broke. We had the Palace Theater closed for a weekend because the water main broke. We got an infrastructure that is falling apart that we really need to look at. And what I was so happy that we put off the MC tonight for the water board, it's not because of that specific project, but I want to call the water board in and find out, what is the plan? How are you going to handle all this excess wastewater and stormwater with all these developments? And that's just one problem. We got to talk about traffic. Look at the roads. I don't know how your wards are. My roads have never been as bad as they are right now. I almost broke my wheel coming here, cutting through the 14th ward. I got to talk to Joe later. But, you know, anyhow, I don't want to tie everybody up. It's a long night. But thank you, and let's keep the conversations going.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Ms. Duche.
I want to continue this conversation about our zoning codes and the lack of enforcement. One of the speakers earlier was criticizing me because I'm asking questions about things that are not being enforced in the city. I, tonight, just saw a response to a FOIL request and have learned that a sign has been approved that violates the ordinance that we just amended. I also want to make sure everybody's aware of this as an issue. In 375-4 of the U.S. Code dealing with standards, if you look under the landscaping and vegetation requirements and buffering requirements, there's a provision in there that says for all new development, you're supposed to have 30% of the lot covered with vegetation. Now, I don't know about you over at on Western Avenue, but I can tell you for a fact, to the extent practicable. So this was a provision that was put in there to help with the sustainability, to recognize that we don't need to build to the edge of every single lot. We don't need to put parking lots in, etc. So when I asked Mr. Glass about this, when I was discussing with him the USDO changes that they're proposing, which doesn't change this, he said that was actually intended only to apply to the portion that actually needs to be landscaped. In other words, it needs to be 30% vegetation, at least, not all rocks and mulch, etc., when they have landscaping requirements. There's another provision in there that says when landscaping is required, you need to have 80% of it to be plant materials and not mulch and rocks, etc. So the provision that he is saying is supposed to be used for that to address that kind of issue is actually addressed elsewhere. And they are ignoring the plain language of the law in approving these projects and not having at least 30% vegetation. And that's one of the issues that we are dealing with that people are concerned about when talking about too much density. You don't, and Gene Solan has talked about it. You know, we don't put downtown kind of development in the upper wards. You expect certain areas to be built out to the max in the past, but that doesn't mean in the future you do it. Mr. Glass also told me that, well, that provision is inconsistent with other provisions. For example, in the RM zone, you only need to have 10%, you can have up to 90% impervious development and paving, etc. There are other provisions, including in 375-1, that say if there's an inconsistency, you apply the more restrictive standard. Again, they're ignoring that particular requirement because they don't like it. It doesn't make sense for the way that the projects are coming in. They want to let the projects go through. So the more restrictive standard is supposed to apply in these cases. But I will also point out that just because your maximum impervious lot coverage is 90% doesn't make it inconsistent with the requirement that you have to have 30% vegetation. because it's not saying, oh, you have to build out to 90%. It's just saying, well, you can build out to 90%. The reason why that 90% is in there for an RM and an MUNC neighborhood center is because part of the goal of adopting the USDO is to not have standards that now turn existing properties that were in existence prior to the zoning code going into existence or these new standards and making it illegal. So that's why some of that is allowed. Again, I'm going to emphasize this. Everybody needs to be looking at these provisions that say you need to have a minimum of at least 30% vegetation coverage in a lot. If you look at the intro to that, it also talks about one of the goals of this is essentially sustainability, oxygenation issues, and also we want to preserve more of the natural vegetation in the city. If you look at 563 New Scotland Avenue, there's a lot of natural vegetation in the back and the rear of that particular lot. I don't know that that's going to be impacted by this. But in general, we need to be paying closer attention to the way the planning department is not enforcing, not looking at some of these provisions. And even when I raise it, and I've raised it a couple times, and apparently they didn't even take a look at it. The comments that I'm making basically saying these developments are violating these particular standards. That's a big problem, and I think it has something to do with the fact that not even the planning department understood the USDO when we adopted it.
Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to respond that sometimes when communities have seen no development in a very long time, development is development, whether it's appropriate or not. Just want to note that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ballerin.
I guess I'm going to ask this to my senior colleagues. So I think many of us have been at planning board meetings where we've had issues with many developments, and we're trying to get many of our residents' concerns addressed. Not that we're anti-development. Quite honestly, we've been anti-development for too many decades. Which is we rolled in this. I remember going to a neighborhood association meeting where the assessor said there's no new building permits being requested from the city. That's a problem also. But we don't want to go to any extremes. But this issue of capacity, the overdevelopment in our city, 5,000 new units, where the population hasn't grown to meet that demand, does give us an economic concern of what's going to happen. How's that going to affect the assessment of everybody else's properties? How's that going to affect all of these potential new buildings that don't have anyone in them? So I guess I'm going to ask my senior colleagues, what actions can we take? Who should we be bringing around the room to have a conversation with so we can make sure that whatever development is being moved forward does have the best interest, but not just of the heart, but of the facts. Because if our population growth isn't really showing that we can handle this new growth, or we're just shoving people from certain neighborhoods out. So I'm going to put that to our leadership. Try to see what actions we can take, who should we bring in, and what difficult conversations we need to have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And before we make a motion to adjourn, let me just try to address some of Mr. Ballerin's concerns. Because I've also had some issues this year, last year, before the planning board, and Ms. Fahey was also involved, because it was an area that affected both our wards, where we weren't successful in reflecting, in the outcome reflecting what our constituents were looking for. And so what I go back to is, and as Mr. Ragusa, mentioned earlier, what is before the planning board right now. And let me go back to the 6-month amendments. The 6-month amendments were proposed towards the end of the term of office of the prior council, and for a variety of reasons, some of which was the amount of time available to really look at those, we ended up not doing them at that point, and instead with the intent that they would be carried over to this council. And I think that they were not just resubmitted is an indication that those 6 months amendments were not ready when they were submitted to the prior council back in November of 2017. And so now it has taken an inordinate amount of time since that period to get to the point of having that 6-month, 1 year, going on 2-year review. So those comprehensive amendments, which are public documents available on the planning board's website, and I think everyone has seen the 18-page summary. So they're at the planning board right now. I believe there is a public hearing coming up on those that the planning board is required to have. And I will tell you, I've been to planning board hearings, and I find them very frustrating because it's just talking to a bunch of people and not getting any kind of give and take back and forth, which I think our public hearings are a lot better, frankly. But once they go through that public hearing process, the planning board does their review, et cetera. I don't know if they're going to make any revisions or not, but at that point, the planning board, once that's done, then those amendments will be formally come to this council for action. We're the ones that adopt the USDO. We're the ones that adopt amendments to the USDO, and the flexibility and the ability of the planning board to approve projects that might not have support or within the constraints or the flexibility that we give them. I also have a case before the zoning board right now, which is an area variance case that, in my opinion, if that application is approved, it would undercut some of the very basic standards of conversion in my ward that were agreed to when we adopted the USDO. That's a little bit of a different issue, but I do see some of these area variances possibly, going in ways that are not consistent maybe with what we thought we were adopting. But here's the point. When those USDO amendments come to us, we all members have a stake in that. That's not an issue for although it'll go to the planning committee. That's something that affects every one of us, every one of our wards in terms of how development moves forward, the types of project, et cetera. I'm not an opponent of density. I think density needs to be planned. Density in my ward and how it impacts my ward is very different than it does in some of the wards uptown. And I think we need to look at some of those larger projects. And I do have some questions about some of those bigger projects uptown and how they really fit in to those communities. At the same time, we need to make sure that we're directing development to those areas of the city that are in need of development and that have been neglected. And the USDO needs to be that instrument which drives development and drives development to where it's needed, and also provides incentives for investments and reinvestment into communities that have been experienced disinvestment. So I guess the point I'm trying to say is, when we get that, it's a dense document. There's a lot there. Don't be intimidated by it. You need to be involved. You need to ask questions. You need to not be a rubber stamp. You need to make sure that we get a thorough review. I don't care how many times we have to meet, et cetera. I'm sure Ms. Fahey will accommodate as far as all those planning committee meetings. But it's our obligation, and to some extent, honestly, in hindsight, I do think some of the review that we did in 2017, that we didn't do the thorough review that we should have, that there were still questions and issues that need to be answered. And I think sometimes we got too bogged down in a lot of PowerPoint presentations and not enough discussion of the actual, nuts and bolts and the language of the actual ordinance and how it might impact us. And so those are things that we do. So to address Mr. Ballerin, when it comes back, when we get those amendments, we have an obligation to really be very active in terms of reviewing and fully vetting them.
Richard? Could I just respond one thing to Alfredo, asking that from a senior member? Richard said we're hung up on PowerPoint. Some people around here are hung up on power. I think that's it. I try talking to people, and it seems like they don't want to listen at all. It's just their way or the highway or whatever, and it's getting pretty frustrated. That's the difference between what it used to be. You'd be able to go in and talk to people. I don't see it like that anymore. When you have a head of the planning board come in and say, well, here's a building should be, according to the USDO, 4 stories. He says, I think it should be 6 stories. Well, what the hell does that tell you? You know what I mean? To sound like Vince Ragusa, I'm sorry to stole your line, Vince. Thank you.
And again, we make the decisions. Mr. Kimbrough? I'm sorry. We did. We adopted it. We did that. If there's no further discussion, I'd make a motion to adjourn.
Second.